On today's show, comparing goalie tandems next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minute Cast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we know that Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren were a great tandem in net. But how much better were they than the Samsonov Vanecek tandem? I'll talk about that a bit later. We'll talk about Charlie Lindgren, a solid number 2 or something more. A bit later, we'll talk about Logan Thompson, a franchise guy or just a hot streak hero. But let's dive into it here from chaos to clarity. If we remember before this tandem, it was the Samsonov-Vanecek tandem, and there was a lot of hope surrounding that Samsonov in particular was revered to be the guy in net in the future for the Capitals. But what did we see from Samsonov and Vanecek? Inconsistency. And if you even want to take a tandem back from that, you take a look at the Holtby-Grubauer, that if you take a look at Samsonov and Vanecek, that was kind of a one-off. That historically the Capitals' net-minding tandems have been, well, rather lights out. So let's talk about that. In contrast, Vanecek and Samsonov to Thompson and Charlie Lindgren in segment number 1 here. And, you take a look back. It was 2022. Not that long ago, but in a lot of ways feels like a lifetime. And isn't that the way life works? It just kind of flies right by. You ever talk to someone and say, hey, remember that one time? I'll tell you, Dan, that was like 5 or 10 years ago. Trust me, the older you get, the quicker time flies. But we went into that offseason with Samsonov and Vanecek both on the roster, both RFAs, both, kind of inconsistent, like I said. And the feeling in DC was we need to commit to one. So what happened is the former GM, Brian McClellan, looked at that tandem. He saw the inconsistency, and he cut bait with both of those netminders. No qualifying offers. He said, I want to change. And what did that mean? There was no NHL netminder in the Capitals organization for a while. So if you want to talk about a statement that enough is enough, Brian McClellan made that statement. Boom. Vanecek gets dealt to New Jersey right before round 2 of the draft. The Caps move up in the draft in the order. And Samsonov's, well, he's the last man standing for a few minutes anyway. And Samsonov doesn't get a qualifying offer. Gone. Poof. And like I say, we enter free agency with literally 0 NHL goalies under contract, a full reset. And I remember that time rather well, and it was a bold move by Brian McClellan. And one of the things I really liked about him was that he wasn't afraid of making bold moves. There was the talk, and if you remember back then, that it felt like the Capitals were all in on Samsonov, and then they were going to try to get another netminder to be a number good 2 option. But as it turns out, that was kind of wishful thinking as Capitals fans, wasn't it? That Samsonov was never really the guy either. And to be clear here, both Sammy and Vanecek had their opportunity. It's not like, it was a brief snippet that, go out and prove it or you're gone. They had plenty of opportunity to try to get things done, and they didn't. And that is when you started to see the change in net. In that, I'm also, did mention in this one because, you take a look at Darcy Kemper and Charlie Lindgren as example, but that was kind of a short thing as well, that I think before I dive into Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren, I don't need to go too deep into it. That if you take a look at Kemper and Charlie Lindgren, as far as Kemper is concerned, that was ill-fitting as well. And ultimately was a good move, the move that sent Darcy Kemper out to the Kings. In return, the Capitals got Pierre-Luc Dubois. Not a whole lot to dive into that. It just didn't work. But now, present day, what we've got in Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren, and the contrast, well, it's wild. You take a look back on Samsonov and Vanecek, 2 RFAs, both unproven and both 25-ish. If I could summarize them, I would say inconsistent. One night they would steal you a game. The next you're down 2 in the first 10 minutes. McClellan even said, quote, "We didn't pick one. We just moved one," unquote. It was all about supply and demand. And the Capitals have learned lessons. And, you take a look at, like I said, Samsonov and Vanecek, there was a lot of hope. And then the Capitals swung for the fences. You remember back when they acquired or traded for and acquired a Darcy Kemper, and that move as well, that was quite a move as well to get him to come to the Capitals. And there was a lot of hope going into that. But if you take a look at it, that, I've talked about on the show before, I don't think that Kemper really got a fair shake. That Spencer Carberry was relatively new with the organization, and they were still rolling out the systems. That by the time the team, not just the netminding, figured it out, well, Charlie Lindgren had ran away with the net. So that is where we are. Present day, we've got Thompson signed through 2031 at nearly $6 million a year. And in the next segment, I'll talk about, was that the right move? You take a look at it. That is a lengthy contract signed through 2031. And what do we know about netminders as they depreciate over time? But that's just kind of what you have to do in modern hockey, is you have to give them the term and you have to give them the money they're looking for, or they're going to test the open market. And you take a look at it. Logan Thompson didn't have any real loyalty to the organization. So it's not like he was going to take a homer discount or anything. And then you also take a look at Charlie Lindgren, signed through 2028, now making starter money for a backup. And in the final segment, I'll talk about him. Was that the right move, as some of his numbers weren't exactly glowing, shall we say? Now, this is a true tandem, but also a planned tandem. This isn't, hoping one guy breaks out. This is structure. This is an investment that, I think the Capitals learned a lesson from previous tandems here. I'm talking more specifically about Samsonov and Vanecek, that they didn't want to go down that road again. And, there were viable options in Hershey, still are viable options. We know that Hunter Shepard is now an Ottawa Senator, but he was for the longest time the number 3 in the organization. And now it's Clay Stevenson's time to shine. The Capitals could have gone into Hershey and selected one of them to instead of Logan Thompson or Charlie Lindgren, but they chose a change. They chose stability, and that is ultimately why they did it. Now the question is did the Capitals get it right this time? Not kind of right, like really right. And, sometimes you can just kind of take a look at the highlight, from each netminder and say, well, of course, Dan, Logan Thompson was lights out and Charlie Lindgren was lights out. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. In the next segment, I'll talk about Logan Thompson. He was in the mix for the Vezina, but let's be clear here. It wasn't all smooth sailing for LT either. I'll discuss straight ahead. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Isn't that the fun part? That, summer's pretty short. And, you want to go to the baseball game and, there's rainouts, there's busy schedules. And sometimes you wait to the last minute to look for tickets. That's where Game Time makes it so easy. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in segment 2 here, we're talking LT Logan Thompson. If we reflect back on that, one of the big moves that was made last summer, like I talked about, Darcy Kemper got dealt out to the Kings. We got PLD. And, going into that, I'm like, great, it's going to be Charlie Lindgren's net. He's going to be the number one in net. And then Hunter Shepard. It's finally his time to shine. But Brian McClellan, looking at it, 30,000-foot view, looked at it and said, Charlie Lindgren was good, but is he good big picture? We saw the season before he was good in the month of December. Then the season that followed was instrumental in getting the Capitals into the playoffs. But is he a proven performer? So he didn't trust that tandem. And Hunter Shepard, let's be honest, he has knocked it out of the park from college all the way up to the AHL, but is not a proven performer in the National Hockey League. So they traded for and acquired Logan Thompson, a netminder that's familiar to the Capitals organization, and a guy that was thought to have a pretty good upside and does have a pretty good upside. But we're going to go into the weeds here a little bit and talk about the good and some of the things that people don't want to talk about, the bad, if we reflect back on the 24-25 season. So let's dive into that in segment number 2 here. And a prototypical modern-day NHL netminder, huge, big guy, 6'4", a little bit unique in the regard, right catching goalie. And, man, he made a statement this past year. And looking back, there's no real disputing it. He started the season splitting time with Lindgren in what was kind of that 1A, 1B arrangement, and kind of modern day hockey tandems where, rarely do you see a netminder, the number one, just play a bulk of the games. That's kind of old school NHL. And you see that sometimes from older NHL coaches that they try to push for that. But the modern hockey era that we're in right now, that the younger coaches, they generally like to split up the workload a little bit. And I say that with a caveat. If, as a matter of fact, you have a good quality number one, and if you have a good quality number two. Now, if your team is worth its salt, it should have a good number one and number two. And the Capitals do have that. And that's ultimately why you have this 1A, 1B scenario. But, you want to talk about Logan Thompson, where he really stood out to shine was in January. Dude was on fire. 8-0-1, a 947 save percentage, 1.48 goals against, 2 shutouts in 1 month, making a statement. There was a buzz around the National Hockey League surrounding Logan Thompson, and what a steal the Capitals got there. Got named the NHL's second star for January. Oh, and there was that whole 16-game point streak, 13-0-3. That was the second longest in franchise history behind Jose Theodore in the 09-10 season. Turn back the clock on that one. You take a look at it, what more could you ask for? And it was tough there. And, part of the success, of course, I think is just alternating, like I said, that 1A, 1B situation where it kept Logan Thompson fresh. We saw that change a little bit towards the latter part of the season going into the playoffs where LT kind of ran away with it. But Thompson gave the Caps a foundation in net, and it showed in stability and trust, something that they had not had in previous tandems. That hot stretch basically gave the Caps the cushion to cruise into the postseason. I'm not a revisionist here. I'm not trying to rewrite history. I understand how important Logan Thompson was in the Capitals' success. And the good thing about it is, especially for, Logan Thompson, as he was a bit sour grapes towards his former franchise, he even got a little revenge, beat them twice this past season. That is the things that I like. You don't want me around? Well, I'm going to stick it to you. And he stuck it to the Golden Knights. But this is the things that people don't like to talk about. It's not all sunshine when it comes to Logan Thompson. Not horrible, but some causes for concern. After that big signing, he kind of dipped. He went 8-4-3 and an .877 save percentage. Goals against down the stretch before suffering an injury in April. And the playoffs, the aggregate numbers were really solid. Best save percentage, .917 among goalies who played more than 4 games. Fourth best goals against, 2.41, and gave the Caps a quality start in 7 of 10 games. And he was key in the playoffs, right? And there were some questions if who the netminder was going to be in game number 1 as he was injured. There was a real feeling out there that Charlie Lindgren was really going to have to, reprise his role as Superman and fly out in a cape and save the Capitals yet again. As it turned out, I'm glad that it didn't come to that, as I think that Logan Thompson, in particular against the Canadiens, was good. But the second round, that is where it got more ugly. And that is where the Capitals made their exit against a Hurricanes team. And some of the play that we saw from Logan Thompson in the second round, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, was just ugly. So what's the big takeaway here? Like, can he handle 50-plus starts a year? Or is he more a ride-the-wave kind of guy? That's the big question. And if he's a streaky guy, is that okay, right? Like, is a streaky goalie better than an inconsistent one? I don't know. Big picture, I like what we saw from him last season, but there is still some causes for concern for me when it comes to Logan Thompson. We saw him really good in the 24-25 season. And then there was the whole thing where he said he got his bell rung. Right? You guys remember that? But the injury, or it looked where it emanated from, as he was reaching for the back of his legs, that, some people have said, and I've thought that sometimes when he's really getting worked over, it's almost like he pulls the eject lever and says, I got something. I got to get out of this game. I'm not saying it is the case. It's just a bit curious, a bit conspiratorial, and something we can dive into in the offseason here as a bit of an interesting character, shall we say. But Logan Thompson, big picture, was good. This season gave us flashes of Vezina caliber goaltending and some reasons for concern. The contract says he's the guy, but is he the guy to carry the bulk of the mail for the Capitals in the foreseeable future, as they took a big bite out of the apple for Logan Thompson? I've been on other podcasts and I've talked about the good, but I've said it's a serviceable tandem. Are there better tandems out there? Yes. We saw true greatness from Logan Thompson, and we saw some, really questionable net minding in the playoffs. Things that are like, that just should not happen. So reflecting back on it, big picture, he had a good 24-25 season. Still some things in my mind that I'm concerned about going into next season, and the seasons that he's going to be a Capital for the remainder of his contract. Some questions and some things to keep an eye on in the 25-26 season. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll continue to talk about the current tandem. In the final segment, I'll talk about Chucky Sideburns, Charlie Lindgren, the Outlaw, straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in the final segment of the show here, we're talking Chucky Sideburns, a guy that was a relative unknown before he came to the Capitals, had a history with the Canadiens, a brief sip of coffee, I guess you could say, with the St. Louis Blues, and came here unknown. But all things considered, was a pleasant surprise. Like, who is this guy? That unless you were an extreme hockey nerd, you probably were not too familiar with Charlie Lindgren. But big picture, again, I remember the season he came here, lights out in December. kind of in a vacuum, really good, and, questionable after that. And then the finals or the following season, he was the big piece in the Capitals making it to the playoffs, period. But, you take a look at this past season, like I said, splitting the tandem up, 1A, 1B situation. What we saw from him was good, but a little more concern for Charlie Lindgren than Logan Thompson. Let's talk about that in the final segment of the show. Talking Chucky Sideburns, still rocking the stash, still giving us gritty blue-collar backup vibes, right? And honestly, he's been a darn good goalie in DC. Back-to-back 20-win seasons. And, in April when Thompson was down, Lindgren stepped in and delivered like a good 1B should do. Started 5 of 6, wrapped up with a 3-1 win against the Isles. He's also been a massive locker room guy, the whole agape love thing. He's a bit, he is who he is, shall we say. Good energy, good teammates, and clearly a guy that the team believes in. And, there are some beat writers that really drink the Kool-Aid on locker room guys. Like, he's such a great locker room guy and does a good interview and the whole agape love thing. And, I don't try to get too involved in the emotional aspect, what kind of guys these are in the locker room and, what kind of smile they have and who gives a good interview. I want the guy out on the ice that's going to give the Capitals the best shot at winning games. Period. If they're nice guys, if they give good interviews, that's an added bonus. But I want the guy out on the ice that is going to kill it between the pipes. And we have seen that at times with Charlie Lindgren. And obviously the Capitals were all in enough on him as he got a 3-year extension, $3 million AAV. And, he was another guy that I would have thought could have possibly been traded. The Capitals, as we hear, have just this glut of talent in the pipeline, right? That, at the time was Hunter Shepard and Clay Stevenson, Garen Bjorklund, Mitchell Gibson. From here to the Shining Sea, we had really great netminders. But the question, of course, is, are the Capitals ever going to make good on a Clay Stevenson, a Garen Bjorklund, Mitchell Gibson, when they have Charlie Lindgren signed to 3 and LT is going to be here for a substantial amount of time? But the numbers are not as pretty for Charlie Lindgren. Save percentage dropped from .911 to .894. Only gave the Caps a quote-unquote quality start in 17 of 38 games. That's 44.7%. Third worst among goalies with 30-plus starts. He allowed 3-plus goals 24 times. So, Mr. Agape Love, Mr. I love giving great interviews to Capitals beat writers, was a bit inconsistent. He had snapshots of greatness, but there were also snapshots of not so great play, shall we say. And analytically speaking, well, that doesn't love him either. He went from a plus 10.5 goals saved above expected to, in the 23-24 season, to negative 1.7 last season. So yeah, not great. The question is, was that middle year, the Vezina vote season, a blip? Or was this year an outlier? And I think why I talked about Logan Thompson in segment 2 is that he was really good last year, but that's one season with the Capitals jersey on. What is he going to look like big picture? As a guy that likes to live in the here and now, a lot like Alex Ovechkin, I guess, he looked good. But I think that I'm going to keep an eye on this tandem and see if it ages like a fine wine or if it ages like a carton of milk. Things to consider. Is he a guy who can give you 35 games at a high level, or should the Caps look at limiting the workload to, say, 20? And, still a guy, I understand, signed that 3-year deal, or the Caps signed him to a 3-year deal. I could see moving at some point. I think the Capitals really need to hone in and look at Clay Stevenson and what kind of season he has in Hershey. I know that he has not been perfect, but, he for the longest time was perceived to be the answer in net for the Capitals. If for some reason, Charlie is less than stellar next season, it's something to consider. Like I said, and I stand by my statement, it was a good tandem last year, a serviceable one. Were there better tandems out there? For sure. And just as I outlined there, Charlie Lindgren's numbers were good, not great. Logan Thompson's better than Charlie Lindgren's, but still some causes for concern against Carolina in the playoffs. So big picture, things to concern, and if you take a look at it, if he starts slipping early this year, you got to ask, is there a better backup out there? And he very well might be in the Capitals organization. Because the margin for error, it's real thin when you're trying to extend Ovechkin's window, right? It is my belief that it is his final season as a Capital, the last really great hurrah push for a Stanley Cup that you want premier talent. And say for some reason Ovechkin does sign an extension, that you would want a guy in net that's going to give you the best chance at winning games. It's all about winning Stanley Cups at the end of the day. I don't think the Oilers thought to themselves, hey, guys, pretty good. We were number 2, right? As they say, second place is the first loser. I think that there is no settling for mediocrity in the National Hockey League or any professional sport. It is you hoisting the Stanley Cup over your head and handing it off to your teammate, or you got to work harder next year. And that's the position that the Capitals are in. I'm happy that they made it to round number 2. Don't get me wrong. A lot of teams didn't make it there, period. But I don't want to set the bar so low for this team that I'm settling for, what this team, I know they're capable of doing more. And I think as Capitals fans, that's what you should want as well. But big picture, an improvement. For sure over Samsonov and Vanecek, an improvement over Kemper and Lindgren. That the best that we've seen, I'm going to say, since Holtby Grubauer is just that. It is Logan Thompson and Charlie Lindgren. I guess I will reserve judgment and see what we see next season. Can they get another solid season? Then a little bit of a longer leash with me, and maybe a better view in the eyes of the critics of the Capitals and the NHL at large. Lots of stories to keep an eye on. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.